Think Like a Freak by Stephen D. Levitt and Stephen J. Dubner. Picture this. It's the 4th of July in Coney Island, New York. The sun's blazing down, the crowd's going absolutely wild, and the air is thick with the smell of salt water and grilled hot dogs. This is the Super Bowl of competitive eating, Nathan's famous hot dog eating contest. For years, the world record has been stuck at around 25 hot dogs and buns in 12 minutes. The competitors? Massive guys who look like they could swallow a compact car without blinking. Then, a young man from Japan steps onto the stage. He's slender, almost delicate. He looks more like he should be studying for finals than competing in an eating contest. One of the other contestants actually mocks him, saying, "Your legs are thinner than my arms." Nobody gives him a snowball's chance in hell. His name is Takeru Kobayashi. The bell rings. The contest begins. The other eaters grab a hot dog, cram it in their mouth, chew, swallow, and repeat. It's how anyone would eat a hot dog, just on fast forward. But Kobayashi does something completely bizarre. He breaks the hot dog in half. Then, he pulls the meat out of the bun. He shoves both halves of the hot dog into his mouth, barely chews, swallows, and then dunks the bun into a cup of warm water, squishes it into a ball, and pops it in. He wriggles and jumps as he eats, this strange little dance the crowd has never witnessed before. The crowd goes from confused to mesmerized to absolutely stunned. When the final bell rings after 12 minutes, the old record of 25 hot dogs hasn't just been broken, it's been completely destroyed. Takeru Kobayashi, the skinny kid from Japan, has eaten 50 hot dogs and buns. He didn't just beat the record, he doubled it. How is that even possible? How does someone come along and not just improve a little bit, but completely revolutionize the game? That, my friend, is the question at the heart of the book we're diving into today, Think Like a Freak, by Stephen D. Levitt and Stephen J. Dubner. You might know them as the brilliant minds behind the smash hit Freakonomics. For years, people wrote to them asking for help, solving every problem imaginable, from obesity to world hunger. It was as if people believed they possessed some kind of magic formula for finding answers no one else could see. But the authors will tell you straight up, there is no magic formula. There's just a different way of thinking. A way of looking at the world not as we wish it were, but as it actually is. It's about stripping away our biases, our preconceptions, and our fear of looking foolish. It's about learning to think like a child again, to ask the obvious questions nobody else is asking, to think like a freak. In this journey today, I'm going to share the secrets from this incredible book. I promise you, by the end of our time together, you won't just have a few new ideas. You'll have a completely new toolkit for solving problems, for persuading others, and for seeing the hidden side of, well, everything. You'll learn why quitting is sometimes the smartest thing you can do, what King Solomon and the rock star David Lee Roth have in common, and how admitting what you don't know is the first step toward true wisdom. This isn't just about learning facts. It's about retraining your brain. So, let's begin. So, where does this journey to thinking differently begin? You might expect it to start with some complex formula, or a grand, sweeping theory. But it actually begins with something much, much simpler. It begins with 3 of the hardest words in the English language. They're not, "I love you." They are, "I don't know." Think about it. From the time we're little kids in school, we're rewarded for having the right answer. We raise our hand. We get called on. We feel smart. We're taught that not knowing is a sign of weakness. So we learn to fake it. Researchers once told a group of young children a simple story about a girl named Mary who goes to the beach in a red car, eats ice cream, and has sandwiches for lunch. Then they asked the kids some questions. What color was the car? Almost everyone got it right. Red. Did they have fish and chips for lunch? No, sandwiches. Easy. But then they asked, did they listen to music in the car? And did they drink lemonade with lunch? The story never mentioned music or lemonade. The correct answer was, I don't know. And yet, a stunning 76% of the children just made up an answer, yes or no. They'd rather be wrong than admit they didn't know. And we adults, we're not much different. We carry this habit into our lives, our jobs, our relationships. We pretend to be experts. We offer opinions with great confidence on subjects we know almost nothing about. The authors call this ultra-crepidarianism, the habit of giving advice on matters outside of one's knowledge. We're all guilty of it. But when you're trying to solve a problem, pretending you know the answer is the surest way to fail. You can't learn anything new if you think you already know it all. Thinking like a freak means having the courage, the humility to start with, I don't know, because admitting ignorance is the first step toward actual discovery. And once you've admitted you don't know, the next step is to make sure you're asking the right question in the first place. This brings us back to our friend, Takeru Kobayashi, the hot dog eating champion. For decades, every competitive eater in the world was asking the same question, how can I eat more hot dogs? Their answer was to just be bigger, stronger, and faster at doing the same old thing. But Kobayashi asked a completely different question. He asked, how can I make hot dogs easier to eat? That simple shift in perspective changed everything. That's what led him to break the hot dog in half, to separate the meat from the bun, to dunk the bun in water. He wasn't a glutton, he was a problem solver. He saw that the existing world record of 25 wasn't some sacred, unbreakable limit. It was an artificial barrier, created by people who were asking the wrong question. So he ignored it. He redefined the problem, and in doing so he discovered a whole new universe of solutions. This applies to so much more than hot dogs. Think about school reform. For years, the conversation has been dominated by one question. What's wrong with our schools? This leads to answers like, we need better teachers, or we need smaller class sizes, or we need more technology. But what if that's the wrong question? The authors of Think Like a Freak suggest a different one. Why do American kids know less than kids from, say, Estonia or Poland? When you ask the question that way, you start looking for answers in different places. You might realize that a child spends only about 22% of their waking hours in school. The vast majority of their time is spent at home. A mountain of research shows that factors like how much a child's parents have taught them, whether they've instilled a love of learning, and how hard the child works at home, have a much greater impact on their success than what happens in the classroom. So maybe the problem isn't just about bad schools. Maybe it's also about what's happening or not happening in the home. But we rarely talk about that, because the very phrase school reform has already framed the problem for us. By redefining the question, you open yourself up to a whole new set of potential answers. Once you've asked the right question, the next freakish step is to dig for the root cause of the problem. We often spend all our time and energy treating symptoms instead of the actual disease. It's like putting a bucket under a leak in the ceiling instead of fixing the hole in the roof. The bucket might help for a little while, but the real problem is still there. The book shares one of the most powerful stories of finding a root cause in medical history. For decades, the world knew what caused stomach ulcers: stress and spicy food. The treatment was to relax, drink milk, and take expensive antacid drugs like Zantac. It was a multi-billion-dollar industry. Doctors prescribed the pills, drug companies got rich. But the patients? Well, they never really got cured. Their ulcers always came back. Then, in the 1980s, a young Australian medical resident named Barry Marshall started working with a pathologist who had noticed something odd. Many of his ulcer patients had a strange, squiggly bacteria in their stomachs. This was considered impossible. The stomach was supposed to be so acidic that no bacteria could survive in it. Everyone else had ignored these little squiggles, but Marshall was curious. He asked a simple, childlike question: what are these things doing here? He and his partner, Robin Warren, discovered that these bacteria, later named Helicobacter pylori, were present in nearly every single patient they saw with an ulcer. A radical idea began to form. What if it wasn't stress that caused ulcers? What if it was this bacteria? The medical establishment laughed at him. They called him a loon. No one would fund his research. He tried to infect pigs with the bacteria to prove his theory, but they didn't get sick. He was at a dead end. So Marshall decided to do something unthinkable. He decided to experiment on the only human subject he could get permission from: himself. He had his own stomach biopsied to make sure he was healthy. Then, he went into his lab, stirred a batch of the dangerous bacteria into a broth, and drank it down. He was hoping to get an ulcer. 5 days later, he started vomiting violently. A second biopsy showed his stomach was now teeming with the bacteria and inflamed, the first stage of an ulcer. He had proven his point. He then cured himself with a simple, cheap course of antibiotics. Barry Marshall had found the root cause. He showed that ulcers weren't a lifelong psychological condition to be managed with expensive drugs. They were a simple bacterial infection that could be cured. It took years for the world to accept it, but eventually, he and his partner were awarded the Nobel Prize. Marshall's willingness to ignore conventional wisdom and dig for the true root cause revolutionized medicine and saved millions of people from a lifetime of pain. This kind of deep digging often requires us to think in ways that feel uncomfortable. Another example the authors explore is the link between slavery and the high rates of hypertension, or high blood pressure, among African Americans today. For years, the gap was blamed on diet, stress, or poverty. But Harvard economist Roland Fryer stumbled upon a bizarre and haunting clue: an old illustration of a slave trader in Africa licking the face of a slave. Why would he do that? Fryer theorized that the trader was testing for saltiness. The horrific journey across the Atlantic, the Middle Passage, was deadly, and a major cause of death was dehydration. A person who is salt-sensitive retains salt more efficiently, which also means they retain water more efficiently. Such a person would be more likely to survive the voyage. So slave traders may have been unconsciously selecting for slaves who were better at retaining salt. Today, that same genetic trait, a high sensitivity to salt, is a primary driver of hypertension. And what Fryer found was that black populations in America and the Caribbean, whose ancestors survived the slave trade, have significantly higher rates of hypertension, but black populations still living in Africa do not. This suggests that the root cause of this modern health crisis may lie in a brutal selection process that took place hundreds of years ago. It's a deeply unsettling idea, but by facing these difficult root causes, we open the door to better solutions. In this case, it might mean a greater focus on simple diuretics, pills that help the body get rid of excess salt. Finding the root cause is hard. It requires a kind of thinking that most of us have forgotten how to do. It requires us to think like a child. Now that might sound a little silly, but think about it. Kids are relentlessly curious. They aren't afraid to ask obvious questions. They aren't burdened by years of experience telling them that's not how it's done. They don't worry about looking sophisticated. It was a child, after all, who pointed out that the emperor had no clothes. Thinking like a child starts with thinking small. We all want to be big thinkers to solve world hunger or climate change, but big problems are big for a reason. They are incredibly complex and tangled. The authors argue that it's often more productive to tackle a small, manageable piece of a big problem. Consider education. A few economists were studying why kids in poor, rural parts of China were struggling in school. Instead of proposing a massive overhaul of the education system, they noticed something small and obvious. A lot of the kids were squinting to see the blackboard. It turned out that a huge percentage of these problem learners just needed glasses. So they ran an experiment. They gave free eyeglasses, costing just $15 a pair, to half the students. What happened? After just 1 year, the kids with glasses had learned 25 to 50% more than their peers. A $15 pair of glasses was more effective than many multi-million-dollar education programs. It was a small solution that made a huge difference, and it came from not being afraid to address the obvious. Children also aren't afraid to have fun, and this, the authors say, is a secret weapon. As we grow up, we're taught that serious work has to be, well, serious. Fun is for the weekend. But think about the people who are truly great at what they do. They don't just work hard, they are obsessed. They love it. Their work is their play. It's hard to get incredibly good at something you don't enjoy. This idea can even be used to solve public policy problems. For example, Americans are notoriously bad at saving money. Why? Because spending money is fun, and saving it is boring. Meanwhile, we spend about $60 billion a year on lottery tickets. Playing the lottery is fun, even though it's a terrible investment. So what if you could combine the fun of the lottery with the virtue of saving? That's the idea behind something called a prize-linked savings account, or a no-lose lottery. It works like this. Instead of buying a lottery ticket, you deposit money into a special savings account. You agree to give up a tiny bit of your interest, and that interest is pooled with everyone else's to create a big jackpot. Periodically, a random winner is chosen from all the account holders. The difference is, even if you don't win, you never lose your original money. You've had the fun of playing the lottery, but you've actually been saving the whole time. It's a brilliant way to harness our love of fun for a good cause. The power of childlike thinking is that it frees you from the trap of your own assumptions. Magicians will tell you that it's actually harder to fool a child than an adult. Why? Because adults have a lifetime of expectations about how the world works. A magician's job is to exploit those expectations. When a magician pretends to shuffle a deck of cards, an adult assumes the cards are being shuffled. A child who has no such assumption might just watch the magician's hands and see the trick for what it is. Kids are simply paying more attention to what's actually happening, not what's supposed to be happening. Of course, once you start thinking differently, you'll come up with ideas that others might find strange or even threatening. How do you get them on board? This leads to one of the most important parts of the Freak Thinker's toolkit: understanding incentives. The mantra of Freakonomics is simple: people respond to incentives. It seems obvious, but we forget it all the time. If you want to change someone's behavior, you have to understand what truly motivates them, not what you think should motivate them. A simple, funny example from the book: one of the authors was trying to potty train his 3-year-old daughter, Amanda. Nothing was working. So, being an economist, he decided to offer a powerful incentive. He got down on her level and said, "If you go to the toilet, I'll give you a bag of M&Ms. It worked like magic. For 3 days, it was perfect. But on the 4th day, Amanda figured out the system. At 7:02 in the morning, she announced she had to go. She did her business and got her M&Ms. Then, at 7:08, she announced she had to go again. A tiny little tinkle. Another bag of M&Ms. At 7:11, you get the picture. She had responded to the incentive perfectly. The incentive was for using the toilet, not for consolidating her bathroom trips. She gamed the system. This teaches us a crucial lesson. The incentives you design are not always the incentives that people receive. People will always find a way to work the system to their advantage. This is sometimes called the Koprawa effect. The story goes that during British rule in India, a leader in Delhi was concerned about the number of venomous cobras. So he offered a cash bounty for every dead cobra. The plan worked beautifully at first, but then enterprising people started breeding cobras in their backyards, just to kill them and collect the bounty. When the government realized what was happening and canceled the program, the cobra farmers did the logical thing. They released all their now worthless snakes into the city. The cobra problem ended up being worse than when it started. The key is to figure out what people really care about, not what they say they care about. There's often a huge gap between our declared preferences, what we say we want, and our revealed preferences, what our actions show we want. A researcher named Robert Cialdini wanted to know what really motivates people to conserve electricity. He surveyed people in California and asked them to rank their reasons. They all said the most important reason was to protect the environment, followed by to benefit society. The reason they ranked dead last was because a lot of other people are doing it. No one wants to admit they're just following the herd. But then Cialdini ran a field experiment. He went door to door, hanging placards, encouraging people to use fans instead of air conditioning. Some placards said, "Protect the environment," others said, "Save money," and some said, "Join your neighbors in conserving energy." Then he measured their actual electricity usage. The result? The environmental and social messages had almost no effect. The financial one had a tiny effect. The one that worked by far the best was the herd mentality message, "Join your neighbors." Even though we deny it, we are deeply influenced by what those around us are doing. Knowing this is like having a superpower. You can design incentives that tap into this powerful, hidden motivator. Sometimes, the most powerful incentive isn't about giving someone something new, but about changing the very nature of your relationship with them. The book calls this changing the frame. For years, the relationship between charities and donors was a simple, transactional one. The charity sends a sad picture, you feel guilty, you send money, and they send you 18 more letters that year asking for more. It's a form of harassment we've all come to accept. But then, a charity called Smile Train, which provides surgery for children with cleft palates, tried something radical. Their founder, Brian Mullaney, hypothesized that many people would donate, but they didn't want to get locked into a long-term, high-pressure relationship. So he ran an experiment. He sent out a mailing with a new offer, once and done. The deal was, make one donation now, and we promise we will never ask you for money again. Every fundraising expert in the world thought he was crazy. But what happened? The households that got the once-and-done letter were twice as likely to donate as those who got the regular letter. And here's the craziest part. When given the option to never be contacted again, 2/3 of the new donors chose to stay on the mailing list. By being honest, giving the donor control, and changing the frame from a nagging transaction to a respectful partnership, Smile Train raised an astonishing 46% more money overall, while saving a fortune on mailing costs. They understood the hidden incentives. This leads to a fascinating and slightly mischievous application of incentives, setting a trap to get people to reveal their true nature. What do the biblical King Solomon and David Lee Roth, the flamboyant lead singer of the rock band Van Halen, have in common? They were both masters of this art. You probably know the story of King Solomon and the two women claiming to be the mother of the same baby. To figure out who was telling the truth, Solomon famously ordered the baby to be cut in half. The real mother, horrified, immediately gave up her claim to save the child's life, while the liar said, "Go ahead, cut it." Solomon had set a trap that forced the two women to reveal their true character. Now, David Lee Roth. In the 1980s, Van Halen was one of the biggest bands in the world, famous for their massive, complex stage productions. Their concert contract was a behemoth, over 50 pages long, detailing every technical requirement for lighting, sound, and structural support to ensure the show was safe. But how could they know if the local promoter in each city had actually read this massive document carefully? They buried a secret test deep inside the rider, on page 40, in the Munchies section. It was a demand for a bowl of M&Ms backstage, with a very specific warning: absolutely no brown ones. When the press got a hold of this, it became a symbol of rock star excess. But it wasn't about ego, it was a clever test. When David Lee Roth arrived at the venue, the first thing he would do was check the M&M's bowl. If he saw brown M&Ms, he knew the promoter hadn't read the contract carefully. That was a huge red flag. It meant he had to order a full, top-to-bottom line check of the entire production to make sure the stage wasn't going to collapse or the lights weren't going to short-circuit. The brown M&Ms were a simple, brilliant tripwire. This technique is even used by Nigerian email scammers. You've gotten those emails, right? Full of terrible grammar, from a supposed prince who needs your help moving millions of dollars. You might think, these scammers must be so stupid. Who would fall for this? But that's the point. The ridiculous email is a filter. It's designed to weed out anyone with an ounce of common sense. The only people who will reply are the most gullible people on earth. exactly the targets the scammers are looking for. The absurd email gets the garden to weed itself. Once you start thinking this way, you'll encounter resistance. You'll have to persuade people who are dead set against your ideas. The book gives some powerful advice here. First, understand that your opponent's view is likely based on ideology and herd thinking, not facts. Arguing with more facts is like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. It won't work. So what do? 1. Don't pretend your argument is perfect. Acknowledge its flaws. If you're advocating for self-driving cars, don't just talk about the millions of lives they'll save. Also acknowledge the downsides. What happens to the millions of truck and taxi drivers who will lose their jobs? What happens when a self-driving car does, inevitably, cause a fatal accident? Being honest about the trade-offs makes you more credible. 2. Acknowledge the strengths of your opponent's argument. An opponent who feels ignored will never listen to you. 3. Keep the insults to yourself. The moment you call someone a name, you've lost. The conversation is over. And finally, the most powerful tool of persuasion ever invented: tell a story. A good story is more than just an anecdote. It's filled with data, context, and a chain of cause and effect. It captures our attention, appeals to our emotions, and lodges itself in our memory in a way that a list of rules or facts never can. The Bible is a perfect example. Most people can't name all 10 commandments, but everyone remembers the stories: Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, Moses parting the Red Sea. Rules are forgettable. Stories are forever. When the prophet Nathan needed to confront King David about his terrible sins, adultery and murder, he didn't lecture him. He told him a simple story about a rich man who stole a poor man's only beloved lamb. David was enraged by the injustice of the story, declaring the rich man deserved to die. And Nathan replied, "That man is you." The story cut through all of David's defenses in a way no direct accusation ever could. This brings us to the final, and perhaps most freakish, lesson of all: the upside of quitting. From the time we're kids, we're fed one message: a winner never quits, and a quitter never wins. We're told to never give in, to stick it out no matter what. Quitting is seen as the ultimate sign of failure, of weak character. The authors argue this is terrible advice. They say we're biased against quitting for 3 main reasons. First, that lifetime of conditioning. Second is something economists call the sunk cost fallacy. This is the feeling that you've already invested so much time, money, or effort into something that you can't possibly walk away now, even if it's clearly not working. It's the logic that keeps someone pouring money into a failing business, or staying in a miserable relationship for years. It's throwing good money after bad. The third reason is that we focus on the concrete costs of quitting, but we ignore the opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is the value of the next best thing you could be doing with your time and energy. Every hour you spend on a failing project is an hour you can't spend on something that might actually succeed. The failing project you can see, the brilliant idea you haven't had yet, you can't, so we stick with the dud. Quitting isn't failure. Quitting is a recognition that your resources are finite. You can't solve tomorrow's problem if you're still dedicating all your energy to yesterday's mistake. Failure, when you learn from it, is just valuable feedback. It's data. The authors themselves are serial quitters. One of them, Stephen Levitt, dreamed of being a professional golfer, but quit when he realized he wasn't good enough. He started a PhD in a respectable field of economics, found it painfully boring, and quit that to study the economics of crime, which he found fascinating, a path that eventually led to Freakonomics. The other author, Stephen Dubner, was in a rock band that signed a major record deal, the dream of a lifetime. Then he quit because he realized the life of a rock star wasn't what he truly wanted. He wanted a quiet life of writing. He then got a dream job at the New York Times, a pinnacle of journalism. And after a few years, he quit that too, to write books like this one. They argue that quitting allowed them to reallocate their resources, their time, their passion, their energy, to things where they had a better chance of success and happiness. This whole book, in a way, is about quitting. It's about letting go of the fear of saying, "I don't know," letting go of artificial limits. letting go of the conventional wisdom that holds us back, and letting go of the idea that there's a right way and a wrong way to think. There's just a different way. A freer way. A way to see the world with fresh eyes, and maybe, just maybe, to solve a problem or two along the way. As we wrap up our journey through Think Like a Freak, it's worth pausing to reflect on what this all really means. This book isn't a collection of tips and tricks, not really, it's a philosophy. It's an invitation to adopt a new mindset, one rooted in humility, curiosity, and a healthy dose of playful rebellion. What I find most powerful about this book is its liberating message. It gives you permission to be wrong. It gives you permission to not have all the answers. In a world that constantly pressures us to be confident, to be decisive, to be an expert, the idea of proudly saying, "I don't know," is revolutionary. It's the key that unlocks the door to real learning. Because until you admit you don't know, you can't possibly find out. The stories of Takeru Kobayashi and Barry Marshall are not just entertaining tales. They are profound parables about the power of perspective. They teach us that the biggest breakthroughs often come not from finding a new answer, but from asking a new question. We are all so often trapped by the frame of the problem as it's been presented to us. Learning to step outside that frame, to redefine the problem on our own terms, is perhaps the single most valuable problem-solving skill we can develop. And the final lesson on quitting is one I think every ambitious person needs to hear. We celebrate grit and persistence, and rightly so. But we rarely talk about the wisdom of knowing when to let go. Opportunity cost is a ghost that haunts our every decision, and most of the time, we don't even see it. The sunk cost fallacy is the chain that ties us to our past mistakes. Learning to quit strategically isn't a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. It's an act of courage to admit that a path is no longer serving you, and to bravely step onto a new one. So how can you start putting these ideas into practice today? Here are a few simple challenges. First, for the next week, make a conscious effort to notice when you're about to offer an opinion on something you don't really know about. And in that moment, try saying, "I don't know." See how it feels. Better yet, follow it up with, "But I'd love to find out." Second, the next time you're stuck on a problem, either at school, at work, or in your personal life, take 10 minutes and do nothing but brainstorm different ways to ask the question. Don't look for answers, just look for new questions. Like Kobayashi, ask yourself, how can I make this problem easier to solve? And third, start looking for the incentives. When you see a situation that seems baffling, why are people acting that way? Ask yourself, what are the hidden incentives at play? What is motivating their behavior beyond what they say? This is like putting on a pair of X-ray glasses that let you see the hidden architecture of the world. We've journeyed through the core of Think Like a Freak today, exploring its most powerful stories and ideas. But I'll be honest with you, a summary can only take you so far. The real magic happens when you hold the book in your hands. It's in the quiet moments, when a particular story or a simple phrase lands in a way you didn't expect. This overview is designed to help you decide if this book deserves your time. If anything we've talked about has sparked your curiosity or challenged your thinking, I wholeheartedly encourage you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning. It's an experience that can genuinely change the way you see the world and your place in it. The link to the book is in the description below. Also, if you found this journey valuable, it would mean the world to me if you'd hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss our next exploration into another life-changing book from the billionaire's bookshelf. Let's keep learning and growing together.